You're listening to the Invisible Condition podcast, a show where we talk about unusually normal things. We have a goal of putting an end to the stigma that surrounds invisible conditions by empowering voices and stepping out of fear and shame. The term invisible condition is inclusive of non apparent disabilities, diseases, and illnesses. I'm your host, Tim Reitzma. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who's donated to keep Invisible Condition going. If you love what we're doing and would like to support, please consider giving the podcast a rating and comment. Share this with friends and family. And if you have the financial means, please consider donating. Head to invisiblecondition.com to learn more. Now, back to the show.
The first big one I can remember was I was 9 years old. I was at the book fair, and there was a book on the Hindenburg crashing, and there was these big photographs of it, full spread photographs. And I remember months that tormented me. The real famous picture of it crashing, or it had already crashed, and the people are running, and there's the fire. Unrelenting thoughts about that photograph at 9 years old. And so you can kind of see how would I even talk to my parents about that? How would I be like, I'm scared of this photo, or this photo, I can't get it out of my mind. You know what I mean? It just is a strange sort of thing. And it's also for me, it's a very quiet illness. I can just sit there and no one would ever know what I'm experiencing. You just sit there and you think about it. For me, it didn't manifest in panic attacks. It didn't manifest in anything like that. It was truly invisible, is that you couldn't even tell by looking me at the face that it was happening.
Okay, how many of you have used the phrase or heard the phrase, I've got so much OCD? Well, if you've used this phrase, after listening to our episode, I truly hope you reconsider. I admit, I had a narrow view of OCD before researching this invisible condition. And my guest, Alicia, founder at 33 and Kip, set me straight. Have a listen to Alicia's early experience with OCD before her official diagnosis, where she bravely shares her journey with obsessive compulsive disorder. We dive into her journey towards diagnosis and how she confronted the stigma attached to mental health. Alicia sheds light on the common misunderstandings and misuses of the term OCD in everyday conversations, emphasizing the urgent need for proper education and advocacy. Her story is not just about the struggles, but also about empowerment and the importance of seeking professional help. If you want to learn more about OCD and not the undiagnosed version, I encourage you to listen on. Alicia, welcome to the Invisible Condition podcast. I'm excited about our conversation today. I think I say that for every episode because I'm just so excited. Today we're going to be talking about OCD, but before we get there, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everyone listening, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, we met through your podcast, through one of our mutual connections, Sean Bernstein, and he was on an episode talking about living a life as a hemophiliac, and that episode resonated with so many people, and I know this episode is going to draw a lot of attention and a lot of curiosity. So I'm just hyping it up so people are going to continue listening. So, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a artist, designer, writer. I own a studio that does branding, graphic design, marketing. So I do a lot of consulting for nonprofits, purpose-driven companies, technology, a lot of the more nuanced and very, let's say, niche or very delicate areas of industries that require a lot of the psychology behind messaging and behind buying behavior. So a lot of marketing strategy, but I'm also a practicing fine artist. So my background is in traditional fine arts. I'm a photographer, illustrator. So it's a really weird mix of right brain, left brain, I call it, that some days I'll be drawing and other days I'll be writing a marketing strategy. And I'm so lucky to be doing what I do. I love it.
I could feel the passion through the video or through the audio today, and I'm grateful that you've chosen to share your journey with an invisible condition, something that's not apparent with me and with our listeners. And when we were connecting weeks ago, just to flesh out the episode, you live with OCD, and uh, I'm curious if you could, or I'd love to actually invite you to share a little bit about your journey of seeking a diagnosis and where you are today.
Sure. So I'm a child of the 90s, millennial. I was born in 1987. So for those who lived through that time, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADD, ADHD, all of these very relative, some more well known than others, and we'll get to that. Uh, Mental illness were not very well known and were not very recognized in children, especially in the 90s. So it's very apparent to me now, as an adult, and after I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and OCD, that I had this probably from the moments as far back as I can remember. So I was labeled as sensitive or easily frightened, uh, which is hilarious to me. Easily
What does that
frightened.
even mean? You're easily
Like,
frightened. That's your
like
diagnosis.
so she's a sensitive child. So this is something I lived with and I coped with, and it's even more interesting that we're having this conversation now because only just a few months ago did I share what I had been going through with my parents. So they didn't even have any. It was shocking to them when I told them what I had been experiencing, uh, as far back as I can remember. So, I coped as well as I could. I led a very normal life. And about 10 years ago, so in my mid 20s, for whatever reason, the serotonin dips, the chemicals change, and it got really bad, really fast. So, one of the things a lot of people think is that, in some cases, it's true that there would be a trigger that will set it off. But in other cases, you could literally just wake up one day and your body chemistry changes. And next thing you know, your anxiety is 1,000 times worse than it was before. So that's what happened to me. Struggled for months and months to try to get it under control on my own. Didn't want to take medication because I didn't want to be one of those people that was taking medication. Went to behavioral therapy, did any variety of non-medication therapy to combat this. Ultimately had what I would consider, I don't want to call it a breakdown, but a breaking point one day where I had convinced myself that I had gone insane and I was going to drive myself to the psych ward. And got an emergency
Wow.
appointment in with my therapist, and he said, "You need medication. We can't do this anymore. This therapy, the behavioral therapy, is not enough." So at that point, I was formally diagnosed with generalized anxiety and OCD. So for the past 10 years, I've been, just chilling, which I say that jokingly, but the Zoloft absolutely has transformed my life.
I'm curious. So you resisted medication,
I did.
and was it in your mind that hey, I can do this or I can control this? Like, what was going through your mind at that time?
It was the concept that, so another stigma around this, another myth, especially within the creative industry, is that if you take medication for mental illness, it will stunt your creativity, right? This sort of bohemian trope. We talked about this a few weeks ago, the Van Gogh trope, that you got to be a little bit crazy, right? To produce, you have to be a little bit unstable to produce very good art and to have your creative outlet. So for me, in my misconception at the time, I was young, I was in my mid-20s, is that no, I don't want that. There was this crippling fear that I would change who I am as an artist and as an individual. I would become a zombie. But people always say that I don't want to become a zombie. It's absolutely not the case at all. So I fought it literally until I was incapacitated and couldn't really function.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for your openness and honesty
Sure.
through your journey. I'm curious about your parents and their reaction, because I've heard from numerous people who want to tell their story, but their friends, their family, have no idea about what they're living with, whether it's with IBD or mental health conditions or whatever it is. How did they take it? Do you just walk in one day and be like, oh hey, by the way, I've got OCD and generalized anxiety disorder, what's for dinner?
I walked in the door and hey guys, it was no, it was actually it was quite cathartic. My brother and sister-in-law and their baby was visiting summer of 2023, and I came out from Denver to visit, so we all were together, and we were just sitting around. It was later at night after dinner, and I can't remember what came up, but we started talking about mental illness and anxiety running in the family and this sort of thing. And I just started talking, and they started asking questions, and I said, I haven't told you guys this before. They knew I was very open about, being on medication and my experience with therapy and everything I was going through about a decade ago, but they weren't aware of the level that it affected me as a child. So sharing that with them, they were deeply troubled that they didn't know. So I wish you would have told us. And at that point, what could I say? I'm 10 years old. I can't get this thought out of my head and I don't know what to do. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And that's kind of where sensitive, she's sensitive, because I was so easily affected by what I would see and what I would hear, which is a classic case of OCD. So they were deeply upset about it. And as are most people that are close to me, when they hear about it, they're usually shocked that I went through anything like that. So it was cathartic to me, probably not cathartic to them because they felt bad, but I mean, it was a long time ago. What could we do? Things are different now.
Yeah, things are different now. Our medical system is very different. I'm in Canada, you're in the US, so we have very different medical systems.
Yeah.
We're not going to get into the pros and cons of our systems.
Yeah.
Yet the advancements have really come a long ways. I'm a child of the late 70s. I'm dating myself. And the same thing where, oh, you're just sensitive.
Right.
You just need to suck it up. You'll get over this. You'll grow this.
You'll grow
It'll
out
be
of
fine.
it, right?
You'll grow out of it. Yeah. How many of us have heard that? Oh, you'll just grow out of it. Oh, it's just a phase. And yet when you're living through that as a young person and not sure how to even express it, and you might not even, so there might be a couple things. You might not know how to express it. And if you do express it, you're just going to get told you're sensitive or easily frightened. So
Right.
why even bother share?
Right. Absolutely. So no fault to them at all.
No.
That just really nobody knew. And,
Yeah.
That's why we're doing this, right? That's why this whole podcast exists.
That's why this whole podcast exists. And that's why I'm seeing more and more young people being more vocal about the conditions they live with. My niece who lives with type 1 diabetes was on an episode, and she's in high school. And she's like, this insulin I take keeps me alive. And when you put it into that perspective and just pause and think about that for a moment, this medication keeps me alive. We're not a show that's pro or against medication. We're not a show that's going to diagnose anything. That's for your doctors. Please consult your doctor. We're not a self-diagnosis podcast. We don't promote that. There's power in self-advocacy, knowing that there's something not quite right. You don't feel quote unquote normal, and you go to seek answers for that from the professionals. So yeah, no fault to our parents. They did the best that they could, I think, for the most part, and they didn't know. And here we are today, right? You decided to, you knew that something wasn't quite right. You weren't living your version of normal. So you sought help. Why is it so important for you to share your story now?
Sure. So I became more vocal about it in the past year or so. I think is just part of a post-pandemic transparency revolution that we're having, that we no longer have to be so, we don't have to hide who we are as much. We don't have to be so polished all the time. We can share our fears with our coworkers, right? If we choose to. We can share our grief. We can cry, right? There was an article about crying, why crying at work is so good. I don't know. To me, I've never really had a great experience crying at work, but I mean, I guess we could
Yeah,
try to cry.
I guess, in the age of a remote office, or a remote work setting, I could cry at home at work and nobody will ever know.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's therapeutic. I mean, I think what you're saying is like, yeah, being vulnerable with people drives something that we haven't necessarily seen in our workplaces.
Right. And for me, a culmination of the changes post pandemic, what it means to be a business owner, what the relationship with your client means, the vendor client relationship, especially within marketing and storytelling and writing. There has to be there's a real connection there. If someone's paying you to trust them with their business, to be the voice of their business, or to be the visual representation of their business through a logo or through graphic design, there's something very very conjoined there that I think is more than other other types of consulting and other types of services. So I think it was just there wasn't anything specific. It was more of a gradual thing that I was starting to be a little more vocal and sharing my story with the occasional client, with the partner, various people in the workplace. And it was baby steps, right? It wasn't just a giant post one day. And some people do that. But for me, it took that confidence to realize that the confidence, first of all, the confidence of moving away from that pivotal moment in time 10 years ago where I had to get on medication immediately, but also the confidence of seeing these reactions and recognizing that people are okay with it and people are sympathetic and people want to learn more, which I thought is really interesting. They'll ask questions. People really want to know more about it. And I guess it's just emboldened me. And now I'm at a point in my mid 30s where I just don't even really care what somebody thinks. Like, if you're going to judge me for it, then all
Yeah.
right, see you later.
Yeah, that's such a common theme is people who want to share their story and then share, or I ask, why is now the right time, or what's been holding them back. It's fear. It's fear of judgment here, fear of offending others, fear of discrimination, fear of being misunderstood. And then the next sentence is, but if I'm judged or discriminated against, or maybe I lose a job opportunity, or
Yep.
maybe a friend doesn't want to be my friend anymore, that's not my loss. That's their loss. And we can move on from that. And so reconciling that in our minds of stepping out of that fear. And it's challenging. It's really, really hard.
It is. It is, especially with mental illness where it's not so cut and dry and everyone's experience is different. And even with the destigmatizing of a lot of this, So OCD, for example, one of the reasons, I felt so compelled to be on here is because OCD is it's not really known. Like, I would say generalized anxiety disorder is decently known at this point. Bipolar, depression, those types of things. But OCD is in its own little bubble over here, like just hanging out, and no one really knows what it is. Not no one. I would say the majority of people, the majority of the average person does not know what OCD really is. So to me, it was important to be like, guys, well, this is what it is and this is what it isn't. And we need to break down this stereotype. We need to educate and break down this stereotype of what it means to be someone living with OCD.
Yeah, when we connected and you said, hey, I live with OCD, the first thought in my mind, which is very stereotypical, which is very, I guess, trendy on social media, is, oh, I've got a little, maybe some OCD because I like things in order. And going down this rabbit hole of preparing for the podcast, I realized maybe I'm a perfectionist, or I just like things in order, which is not the definition of OCD. And so
Right.
I pulled a definition just to ground us. And I think this is a good definition. It comes from a government health website. And I'm looking at my other screen. I'm going to read it here. Is obsessive compulsive disorder is a long-lasting disorder in which a person experiences uncontrollable and reoccurring thoughts, obsessions, engages in repetitive behaviors, compulsions, or both. People with OCD have time-consuming symptoms that can cause significant distress or interfere with daily life. That is more than just rearranging things on your desk so they're nice and neat and tidy. That is, as you know, I was reading some articles. It's like, well, cool, you're a perfectionist.
Right.
You're not. You maybe don't have OCD. So when you hear that definition, and then when you see things on social media about, oh, everyone has OCD, or to some extent, or I've got so much OCD, what's your reaction to that?
It's like waves. It's every emotion within 1 second. It's humor, but then it's also anger, but then it's also apathy, but then it's also like determination. So it's it's like
Wow,
all
that's a
these.
lot to
It's
unpack
a
in
lot,
that.
lots of fact, right? And so it's I sit here and it's like getting dark because it's what we're almost at the solstice, which is also a very interesting time to be recording this, the shortest day of the year, right? And this is also a very challenging time for people with mental illness, physically and mentally. What these, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir with you. I mean, you're up. How much daylight did you have today? Maybe an hour.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not. I'm from the north, but not the Great
Not
White
the
North. For all the Canadians.
so, so back to your question. So, the first thing I think is, that's not true, and it irritates me that it's tossed around in that way. And there's worse injustices in the world, but for anyone who says that, I would love for them to have spent just 1 hour in my mind during that time. And so this would have been like, I mean, I had bouts of it in my teens, bouts of it when I was a kid, and then throughout my 20s. Mid 20s was the worst of it. And what that felt like. And I guarantee you, no one would be organizing their nail polish by color or amount of glitter and saying that's OCD.
So I'm curious, what did it feel like? How did this show up for you? What did it look like? I was just trying to get a glimpse into your mind.
You don't want it. You
Oh,
don't want the
I'm so
glimpse.
curious.
How
I'm
did
so
it? Yeah,
curious.
okay. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. So it's so intense and so traumatic. I can remember pretty much every single thing that was a trigger for me that I saw or experienced. So I'll give you a few examples. So the first big one I can remember was I was 9 years old. I was at the book fair, and there was a book on the Hindenburg crashing, and there was these big photographs of it, full spread photographs. And I remember months that tormented me. The real famous picture of it crashing, or it had already crashed and the people are running and there's the fire. Unrelenting thoughts about that photograph. At 9 years old. And so you can kind of see how would I even talk to my parents about that? How would I be like, I'm scared of this photo, or this photo, I can't get it out of my mind. You know what I mean? It just is a strange sort of thing. And it's also for me, it's a very quiet illness. I can just sit there and no one would ever know what I'm experiencing, right? You just sit there and you think about it. It doesn't, for me, it didn't manifest in panic attacks. It didn't manifest in anything like that. It was truly invisible, is that you couldn't even tell by looking me at the face that it was happening. So that's one of them. Similar vein, throughout my teens, I would see something and it was like this, it's being trapped in a nightmare. Like, so most people, you see something, you watch a horror movie, whatever, you see something, that happens. Oh, that's terrible. And then a few hours pass. Maybe for some people love horror movies and love that stuff. They listen to murder mystery podcasts and all that stuff. Some people find it relaxing. You can watch it and then you just move on, right? You move on. For me, there's no moving on. It's a cyclical. And then you obsess. That's the obsessive. You obsess over it. You want to learn more. So, once I got older and there's the internet, then I go down these rabbit holes and it only feeds into it more. And then I'm researching something I saw that upset me. And then I see more things that upset me. And then it's a waking nightmare. If I'm not focused on something specific, like at work, and I held down a job the whole time, was growing my business, doing things. If I wasn't keenly focused on very, very challenging task, my brain would just instantly go back to it. And then it would start that cycle again. So it's my brain was not happy. It was not happy. And I think I told you this before. So what it does to you is that having these cyclical thoughts, where a lot of times there's a component of harming someone or doing something really horrible. And so there's the what if. What if I did this? What if I did the most horrible thing I could ever imagine? Am I capable of that? So it's all framed in this what if realm that you are never going to be able to get the answer to. It's like, well, what if that did happen? But there's no guardrails. So you can continue to go down the path without any sort of realism, a realism bubble that a normally functioning brain would have, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, thank you for sharing that glimpse into your life. I know it was a vulnerable share, and I think for listeners and for myself, that just paints a picture that I hadn't even thought about. I had no idea about. So thanks for being vulnerable.
You're welcome.
Second is, if you hear that phrase, I've got so much OCD, or everyone has a bit of OCD to an extent. After hearing Alicia's story, you gotta just stop it. You gotta stop that language. Like, I don't know what else to say about that. The word micro discrimination is now, I've heard it, and I've been exploring this language. That is discriminatory language. We think of necessarily like that word discrimination in gender or ethnicity, but around disability, there's so much discrimination in the language we use. And Yeah. Wow. We got to stop. We got to stop this.
Yeah, it would be really great to see a day where it's discussed within the same vein as depression and
Hmm.
some of these more well-known mental illnesses, because I do think a lot of people don't even realize, the people that do have it, a lot of times they don't realize they have it, or if it comes on later in life. So there needs to be the destigmatization of it, recognizing it is a very serious mental illness, but then also educating people who could have it and are living this nightmare. So the whole thing is just, it's like, when is this going to happen? Because it really seems ripe that there should be something at this point about it.
Well, I mean, that's the whole purpose of invisible condition. And if we can change language in one person's vocabulary, and then that person changes to other people's vocabulary, and then it just creates this snowball, this cascading effect. And I was reading, and again in prep for this, I was telling you before we hit the record button, is I was reading an article of a psychologist and sitting down with a young patient, and this young patient said, I think I have OCD. And the psychologist, a doctor, said, okay, well, tell me more. What makes you think that? Well, I watched this video on TikTok of somebody saying they think they have OCD and here's the symptoms. So because they think they have the symptoms, then I think I have the symptoms. And so we create this I don't know what the word I'm looking for, almost overcorrection, like
Right.
overgeneralization, where we're watering down these very significant and impactful conditions.
Yeah.
And I think social media is great, but also frustrating place, because if you put a comment in there saying this is wrong, you're going to get attacked by 300,000 other people. And uh, I don't know how to solve this, to solve that problem. Maybe we could do it in the next 5 to 10 minutes. We can solve the world's problems and move on. But you, yeah, big
You
sigh.
could. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'll give it my best shot. I'll give it my best shot. But yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's going to take time, right? It's going to take people sharing their stories, just like with anything. It's so pervasive in the workplace. It's so pervasive. I mean, I hear it constantly in the same vein that someone organizing their sticky notes, right? Oh, I'm so OCD about my sticky notes or my desktop. It's like, wait, well, hold on a second. Like, you wouldn't say I'm. I mean, I guess what would be a similar. You wouldn't say in a business meeting, this this PowerPoint is making me suicidal, right? But someone very well could say, oh, I see you're using two different fonts on this PowerPoint, and my OCD is making me notice that font. So can someone please change that? So you can see how two mental illnesses of a um, similar importance. I don't know if importance is the right word. Uh, are used. It's totally different how they're used and how they're accepted.
Maybe I should start an Instagram, a hashtag. I've got so much Crohn's right
I
now.
guess.
Like, if you go to the washroom more than once, twice a day, it's like, oh, I've got so much Crohn's. It's like, oh, try going 30 to 40
Yeah,
times.
yeah.
Then we could talk. Then you're at my level and we can talk about this. But you're absolutely right. It's pervasive in the workplace. This language, the language of, oh, they're so crazy. Oh, they're so fill in the blank. Oh, they're so OCD over this.
Yep.
Oh, they're so, and this might offend somebody. Some people might be squirming in their headphones right now listening to
Because they've
this,
said it.
because
They've said it,
because you
Tim.
said it.
They've said
And
it.
you know what? I am likely guilty of saying it too. I'm not here on a pedestal saying I've never said anything like that. But by listening to authentic and real stories like yours, we can start to recognize our own language. And if we start recognizing our own language, we will drive change, and we will then, the next step is to have the courage to correct other people's language.
Right.
Like if somebody says, oh, that person is X, Y, or Z, it'd be like, oh, really? Tell me more about that, because my friend lives with OCD, and so how does it manifest for you?
Right.
And sit there in awkward silence, and not to make fun of anyone, but to call it out.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And what's been interesting for me as a business owner, in that role of being hyper aware of what I look like, how I present myself, and all the various stereotypes that go into being a female business owner, which is a whole nother conversation. But being a female business owner in a male dominated industry with a lesser known mental illness, it's like, okay, what does that mean if she says I have OCD, or I've been diagnosed with OCD and struggled with it and it was really rough and I'm better now, I'm on medication? Do they believe me? Firstly, if I've not established that trust yet with the client, or are they thinking in the back of their mind, is she going to be not able to do her job because she's going to get distracted because she's going to have to wash her hands all the time? Or is she going to be a real weirdo and not be able to focus? Or maybe she seems fine now, but maybe next week she's going to be weird. Like all these sort of general things that's like, how do you overcome those? And going back to your point, a couple minutes ago, you don't really, unless there's the education and they want to know, then, sorry, see you later. Right. If they're not going to have that
Mm-hmm.
openness and they're going to judge me, then I don't have to waste my time with them. So in a way, it's a blessing because I'm much more efficient in my acquaintances and friends and my business partners and all that.
Yeah, it's like we talk about accommodation in the workplace, as an employee, employer, but as a business owner, it's almost a certain description of accommodation. And if somebody's listening to this and you're in conversation with a potential client and they listen to it and say, oh, I don't know about this anymore, well, maybe you should check your biases. Simple as
Exactly.
that. Check your biases.
Exactly.
Maybe you should check your level of acceptance, your level of inclusion. And maybe it's an opportunity to get curious.
Yeah.
There's so much data, and I've recorded a podcast with someone who's a disability recruitment expert that's coming out in a bit as well. And we talk a lot about how people with disability, whether it's apparent or not apparent, work harder than those who don't. They produce more and they're more loyal. So if there's fear of, oh, they just trusted us with this information about their condition, we don't know if we can work for them or work with them or for them or whatever that looks like. Just remember that we work hard, just as hard, if not harder than everyone else, because we have this to overcome this level of discrimination.
Right.
If we're a consultant, we're going to make you a lot of money. A client, we're going to help you out, and we're going to make you a lot of money. And so it's time. We need to move past this and normalize it. And I think of OCD and I think of the TV show America's Got Talent. Howie Mandel, very famous guy, also fellow Canadian, yay! And he's been very outspoken about his OCD and his diagnosis of OCD. And do we treat him any differently? No. So we can't treat others differently. Simple as that. Is that a generalization? Is that fair to say?
Around OCD?
Around OCD, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing about it is that there's these two distinct camps of it. There's the intrusive thoughts, but then there's also the tendency to do things, the habits, or the certain, I guess, like ticks, if you will, of doing certain things. So, and then there's overlap too. I mean, it's just so
Yeah.
it's it's such a gray area of, and then there's overlap in the anxiety, right? So you treat, well, at least for me, you treat OCD with the same medication you would treat depression or anxiety.
Hmm.
So again, sometimes they kind of get clumped into this similar grouping. But I mean, yeah, I would say that's certainly that's a fair statement.
Yeah. I'm curious. So somebody's listening to this and they know that maybe something's going on with them. They're not feeling like their old self or how they remembered themselves. What would you tell that person?
Oh, I think back to my first therapy visit. I was such a mess. I remember I got in there, and as soon as I sat down, I started crying hysterically. I don't even think I had a chance to even introduce myself. Just having that, knowing that, this was the beginning of the journey, and having that safe space after trying to keep it together hour after hour, truly overwhelming. Um, I would tell folks to go talk to somebody, I, go talk to a psychologist, um, or a psychiatrist. I mean, the psychologist is going to do more behavioral type stuff, but just speak to someone. Don't go down the WebMD rabbit hole. Don't go down TikTok. Go talk to a professional. Yeah, talk to them about what you're going through, even if it's a single visit. Uh, Go and see somebody and get more of an idea, and don't speculate, and don't be frightened, because nothing. Anyone who's listening to this, no reality is worse than the reality that's in your brain when you're dealing with this. So it's all uphill from here. You're at the bottom basically. If you're unmedicated with OCD, you're at the bottom. Nothing possibly worse could happen to you than what you're already experiencing. So go and take that first step of starting to figure out what's going on with you and make things better.
I love that. Practical insight right there is don't go down Dr. Google or WebMD or social media. Seek professional help.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in that. There's no there's stigma. Sure, we're going to end that stigma, and by you taking that first step is going to help end the stigma that surrounds it. And that's kind of leads into the wrap up of my last question I love to end with is how are we going to end the stigma that surrounds invisible conditions?
How we're going to end it?
How are we going to?
We're going to be advocates of it. We're going to recognize when it's being used inappropriately. And we're not going to insult the people or make them feel bad, because a lot of times they just don't know, right? Going to educate and help them learn what the difference is in a way that doesn't make them feel bad, doesn't make them feel embarrassed. Purely education, right? I've never had a conversation with someone about OCD and they have had a negative reaction or laughed at me or scoffed at me. Never. I'm not saying it won't happen, but I think in general, people exorbitantly overfear what's going to happen, even if they merely have an exchange with someone about you shouldn't do that. Most people are not going to yell at you and freak out, right? They're going to be embarrassed usually. And just continuing down that path of calling it out when you see it, recognizing and educating yourself on what it is. That's really all we can do right now, and continue to share stories.
Yeah, there's power in our stories. I know there is. I've heard firsthand from people who started listening to the podcast, and there is so much power in stories like yours, for stepping out vulnerably, for seeking the help that you needed, to being a functional human,
Right.
building a business, has a successful business, and is focused at ending the stigma. I used to say, "How can we?" And I've switched the wording to, "How are we
How
going
are
to?"
we? I love that.
So we are going to end this stigma, and by uniting our voices, that's what we're going to do. So, where can people find you if people resonate with your story, or people are curious about your work, the work that you do? Where could people find you?
Sure. So you can either search for me, my name, or you can search for my business name. So Alicia Disantis. My business is 38th and Kip. So search for that. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Um, I have, if you're interested in my work, what I do, if you're interested in seeing what kind of work I produce, you can go to my portfolio, which is 38thandkip.com. And, I'd love to chat about it. I'm an open book. Honestly, I really don't. You can pretty much ask me anything and I'll answer. So, um,
It's true. I've asked a lot of questions on record and off recording, and you are an open book.
yeah,
And don't worry, we're gonna have all your links in the show notes as well. So if people are interested, head to invisiblecondition.com, and or wherever you get your podcast, you're going to see links there. So thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation, taking us into a glimpse of your life. That's moving, and I thank you for that.
you're most welcome. And if anything comes of it, then we've coined a new phrase. I have so much Crohn's.
I've got so much
I've got
Crohn's.
so
Yeah.
much Crohn's, bro.
Yeah, only when I drink too much coffee, or is that too much information? I don't know,
Well,
but
but isn't it ridiculous when you think of it that way, right? If you
yeah,
insert another illness into that phrase, it just becomes so
yeah,
outrageous.
it does. I've got so much arthritis right now. It's like, no, you pulled something at the gym,
Yeah,
trying to look all bro or
yeah.
all
You're
buff.
just cold. You
Um,
didn't wear mittens
you're just
outside.
cold. Yeah. I love you. My famous one. My kids really don't like this is when they're not feeling well, or they're stiff or sore or have a headache. I'm like, did you drink enough water today? Like, Dad.
Right, right.
Yeah. So we digress. That was a lot of fun. Again, thanks so much. And for those who are listening, I really appreciate all the comments, all the support you've been outpouring to this project. There's big things in store coming up after. I know we'll be releasing this episode before some more announcements, but please share it out, like and subscribe, whatever you do, and let me know if you have a story that you feel called to share. Let me know, and you can find all that information on the website invisiblecondition.com, and I hope everyone has just a fantastic day. Thanks for tuning in.